Hello, everybody. Welcome to already the 9th edition of our Disruptive Fridays series. My name is Lieke Ploeger, and I'm directing the community program here at the Disruption Network Lab. And today we're happy to host a conversation on crossing borders, Sub-Saharan communities of care and resistance. So just before we start, a short reminder to everybody that you're welcome to join also the chat that we have online, where you can ask questions to our speakers of today. And you can also post comments or any links there that you have. And you can do so at any time. And please don't wait till the end with your questions so that we can also take them up into the Q&A later on. Then also I would like to thank Jody Rose of the Rogue Agency for Open Culture and Critical Transformation, because she introduced me to two of today's speakers, Jedi and Sharlotte, also through the amazing Defy Hate Now network that they run on countering hate speech. So many thanks, Jody, for that. It's been really great to get to know Jedi and Sharlotte. And of course, we're also very happy that Peter is here today, who was introduced by our co-host Magnus. So I will do a brief introduction for Magnus Ag, who's here joining me as co-moderator of today. And he also helped to shape this edition together with me. So Magnus Ag is a human rights advocate, journalist and researcher. And he also spoke in the past at Disruption Network Lab conferences. And he's the founder and director of Bridge Figures, which is the co-host also of today's session. Bridge Figures is a human rights organization that works with artists, activists, and journalists on building bridges. And this is also something that we plan to do a bit of in our session today. So handing over to you, Magnus, to introduce today's topics briefly.
Yes, thank you so much, Lieke, and thanks for inviting me into being a co-host here and with Bridge Figures. Really pleased for the opportunity, and as the core of our organization is to build these digital bridges in particular. So with all the bad things of COVID-19, I think there's an opportunity that we can now host panels, and we could before, but we wouldn't do it if we weren't physically in the same location. So the starting point for the theme, and Lieke and I started talking about, was this paradox that a pandemic is global, and yet most of the coverage, many of the conversations, including the ones I'm part of, are fairly local and national, like it stays there. And I think there's a good argument that why we need more global perspectives, why we need to understand communities around the world, because we're facing the same challenge and we're not solving it unless we've all solved it. That's the nature of a situation like the one we're in. And for this specific session, we've then decided to focus on creative and journalistic communities, activist communities, what they're doing, and in particular, what they're doing in Sub-Saharan Africa. And that's why we're really pleased with the speakers. We have Sharlotte, Jedi and Peter joining from Uganda and South Africa and Nigeria to kind of hear what they've been working on. They have some fascinating projects and research they've been doing, and that's to open a conversation that turns over to some questions and answers with you, the audience, as well, about what they've been up to. But so today the focus is on Sub-Saharan Africa in particular and kind of creative journalistic communities. Thanks.
So then I'm happy to introduce the first speaker, which is Jedi Ramalapa. She's a South African broadcast journalist and also the current editor-in-chief of Sound Africa, which is a non-profit podcasting organization. And they work on producing original narrative audio journalism, which aims to change the stereotypes and cliches about Africa and Africans. And over the past month, she has been hosting the weekly podcast series COVID in Africa, which looked at the African response to COVID-19 and how it's affecting people on the ground. So over to you, Jedi.
Thank you very much, Lieke, and thank you for the invitation to present here. Really, I think this conversation is happening at a great time. When I came into 2020, I was starting this new job at Sound Africa, and I was very keenly aware of the fact that within the African continent, we were not communicating with each other either as journalists or even just societies. I think from having lived and worked in Senegal and South Sudan, and maybe a little bit in Kenya, I started to notice that, like, maybe for some people in other African countries, they know a lot about South Africa, but with South Africa, we don't know a lot about what is going on in other countries, in African countries, or what they have, what mechanisms and strategies they were employing or implementing to meet up. Was one of my mandates when I started this. And so when COVID-19 happened, really great opportunity to see how we could do that, because the of us and whatever happens to our neighbors was going to have a direct impact on us. So in March, we started doing a podcast called COVID in Africa, where we wanted to try and see what was how other countries were dealing with the COVID-19, the restrictions, the measures, and also to see how societies were being changed by it. And in doing so, what we discovered, at least for me, because I have a little bit of a human rights background, and I spent a year in South Sudan as a media trainer, trying to help journalists write stories around human rights. I felt that COVID-19 brought with it a lot of restrictions on our basic and fundamental human rights. First of all, the right to life, and also the right to everything else. And I think it was a very good example of showing how all of these 30 human rights that we have as human beings are interconnected. And if you take one away, it'll definitely affect the rest. So in our stories, for example, you would see that if someone's right to work is being restricted because they can no longer, go out and, assemble outside, it means that their right to health is also restricted, because now people were no longer having access to food, and other people were not having access to water because the water was not in their homes. They were not having tap running water within the house. So now going out was becoming a crime, which meant that they didn't have their right to water. In other cases, people were being evicted as well from their homes, which their right to shelter was being taken away as well. And then we have the most prominent one, which started very early on when COVID-19 measures were being implemented, the right to not to be tortured, and we've seen a lot of police brutality that has taken place since March across the African continent. I think in South Africa, one of our first COVID-related deaths was through police and security, and who were enforcing COVID measures the other way around. I think also recently you will have seen a documentary produced by the BBC where people in Matari Township in Kenya were protesting against police brutality. Basically, it just showed the things that governments in different African countries were not doing, that now we are seeing very clearly that African governments were not investing in people's human rights, because if we are unable to assemble or be out together, if you're in the house, you don't have access to electricity, you don't have access to water, and in some cases, you don't have access to food. That means all of your human rights, all 30 of them, are impossible to achieve. And I think this is what we have actually discovered with the COVID-19 coverage, that people's human rights have been severely affected. And actually, it's not just one human right that's more important. All of them are equally important. Including, the right to leisure, etc. And so, yeah, so I think that through the stories that we've seen, like in one of our first episodes, for example, we went to Sierra Leone, where we saw how the country there felt that they were more like prepared to, they were more prepared to deal with the coronavirus crisis, because of, having had practice in previous years through the Ebola outbreak in 2014. So then they were able to actually implement measures fast, closing borders, encouraging their citizens to wash their hands and, practice social distancing. And the citizens were already made aware of these things through, previous years of deep education and radio programs that they had that were educating people about their rights. But also in South Africa, we see two very worrying trends where there is discrimination against health workers, for example, who are working at hospitals where people are affected with coronavirus because people are afraid that they will get it. So we are already seeing some really interesting sort of fault lines that are starting to emerge as a result of this. And most of them is happening not because of the disease itself, but of societal issues that are pre-existing in society that are making it worse. The issue of debt also, which I think Peter will touch on much later, is something that we're seeing coming up as well, that, countries, African countries who are using their public funds to service debt means that they are taking away an investment in people's human rights. And that means people will never actually come out of poverty. So we really need to look at funders need to look at how they are lending money to African countries, because it's becoming an ethical issue of, requesting governments to pay huge amounts of debt at the expense of their citizens. So there are a lot of other things that come up, but I think I will have to wrap it up here in case there are other people who have specific questions or people who want to add more.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jedi. That was so interesting. And also, I would really recommend everybody to check out your podcast, because there's already many editions of the COVID in Africa podcast, which are very awesome. So I would just like to ask you one question. I mean, later on, we will also have time for more questions from the audience. Could you maybe say something about, what is the future of the podcast, or what are the next plans of Sound Africa? It was quite impressive how you managed to pull this together with this weekly series in such a short time. So what's up?
Yeah.
What are the plans?
Oh, thank you very much. For now, we are in discussions trying to think about it, but unfortunately, we're wrapping it up in the next week. That will be our final episode, and we'll take a month off to re-strategize and figure out how we go forward with it. I have been working sort of on my own for the past 2 or 3 months. And yeah, so I feel like I also need to exercise my right to leisure a little bit. But we are working on another podcast series coming up soon called One Night in Snake Park. And that one will be looking specifically at the xenophobic violence that we've seen in South Africa. In recent years, specifically the one relating from 2016, where a 14-year-old boy was shot at by a Somali migrant. And we'll just go into all of the issues that influence and cause this, I would call it some kind of a pandemic in our country, where we have people attacking foreign migrants. So that will be our next series. It's a 6-part series that we are all very excited about.
Oh, that's really great. Thanks so much. Interesting to follow for the future for sure. Then we'll hand over to Magnus for introducing our next speaker.
Yes, yeah, and I can second. Definitely go check out the podcast. It's really great. And then I have the honor to introduce Peter, who is an independent investigative journalist based in Abuja, Nigeria, and has done great reporting and been awarded several prizes for that. I know Peter from when we were both at the Committee to Protect Journalists. He was the West Africa representative, so he also has an activist side to it, where both defending journalists specifically, but also other activism. And Peter has been doing investigative journalism on and during the COVID-19, and among other things, looked at public procurement and how governments are spending funds in this new situation. So that's what Peter's going to talk to, and I'll leave it to you, Peter, to take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share because about sharing experiences, about people understanding that what we're going through it's a common thing, it's a common humanity, a common threat. And so it's an opportunity as well for humanity, for mankind to rally ourselves together and say, you know what, we can do this as one. And that's the solidarity that we are seeing. And that's the solidarity that this program, I believe, is also going to help to spread. Because speaking from all of us from different corners of the world, that tells us that we can do something together when we are united. Yes, the situation in Nigeria, particularly, has been a case of sometimes the more you see or the more you look, the less you see. Right now, Nigeria has about recorded about maybe roughly 19,000 confirmed cases of victims of confirmed cases of COVID-19, and of this total number, we've had less than 500 deaths and over 6,000 discharged that have been treated. That is since February 27, because that was when Nigeria actually announced that its first COVID-19 case. So we can see that within over 3 months, there has been an upsurge, but maybe not as practicing as other countries where it has spread, like South Africa, for example, that has the highest. But the issues that we have noticed in terms of what COVID-19 has brought, it has brought citizen resentment, it has brought about public outcry, and I put it in context. Um, we have the Center for Disease Control, and they started dishing out figures. You know, how many have been confirmed today, how many have died, how many in released, how many discharged. And after a while, people started having this discontentment and that look, stop giving us figures. We want to see people's identity, right? Well, why was this so? Because in other countries, you will see Spain, UK, or any of the US, sometimes you will see the visuals of people. So you're not just using statistics as data, you're actually having faces and people can empathize with that. So they started having, there was that growing discontentment that, look, stop giving us figures 25 today, tomorrow 100 today. Who are these people? Are they human beings at all? And it even brought about a trend on social media where there was like end COVID-19 scam. There was also the issue that generated lots of controversy when the Chinese, there were some medical personnel that came into Nigeria from China, and the thought was that okay, they're coming to help to solve the COVID-19 problem in the country. But our own medical professionals and others said, no, we don't want them. You guys should stay there. We can solve our problems ourselves. So there was a sense of trying to own how to solve your problem and not necessarily trying to borrow what is happening in other and also crime and human rights violations were on the increase. I mean, at the time, we even had that was when there were lockdowns and curfews. In enforcing those lockdowns and curfews, we saw where even security agents were very, very vicious. And at the time, we even had more deaths related to the enforcement of lockdown measures than actually deaths from COVID-19. So I'm just tracing how the past 3, 4 months have been. And this is where people have mostly been focusing on that the citizen resentment, public outcry. But something else has been brewing under all of this. In in the course of this whole fracas of COVID-19 having an impact in the country, there was a lot of solidarity. And how did this solidarity materialize? Whereby you saw people giving their own money, donations. People were coming, the private sector started giving money, raising billions. They were philanthropists who were giving theirs. Even ordinary citizens were just donating money to try and buff up the coffers to fight this virus. And while this was going on, there was little focus on accountability in terms of the management of these funds. And I think that is where I started looking into because I started asking myself, look, we have a history. Africa, Nigeria has a history of being corrupt. It's not because I want to say to tarnish any image, but it's a reality of it. We all know it. It's been said, it's been proven. Indexes all over the world show our data. And so whenever funds come in, we always have to be all the cautious, we have the conscious mind that look, as much as it is meant for good, there are people who want to benefit from profit from it.
We had a little bit of a connection issue on some parts, in particular around your example. That I found the example really interesting, but just to keep in mind, maybe not everyone heard it. I have just a quick follow-up question, see if the connection holds for that. Otherwise, we'll jump to Charlotte. But how is there an audience in Nigeria, people listening to like your reporting and the general kind of look at that complex issue of procurement and corruption, or where is the focus right now? And maybe a brief answer just to make sure the connection stays.
Okay. I hope you can hear me. And well, yes, there is. I mean, we have quite some very active civil society actors. And what we are using to ensure that we hold these topics up is we're using the Freedom of Information Act, that's the access to information, to ask questions. And those who reply, we analyze the replies and forward it back to the public. Those who don't reply, we still go back to the public and say, we've asked these questions, nobody's talking to us, the public should rise up.
Oh, great. Great, thank you. Very encouraging. And we'll follow up again in the questions later on, and then I'll turn it over to Lieke again. Thank you, Peter.
Right. Moving on to our third speaker of today, which is Sharlotte Kigezo. I'm really happy that she's joining us too, today from Uganda. So she's a psychologist, mental health advocate, and spoken word artist based between Kenya and Uganda. And she's passionate about mental health and community-based programs that build for a strong mental and physical foundation for society. And she has worked on facilitating trauma healing programs for refugee communities and also art therapy programs for the creative and arts community. So handing over to you, Sharlotte.
Okay, so hello everyone. We can relax. Can we all... and then breathe out. Yeah, I am a psychologist, so it has to start that way, because I feel this time has had a lot of mental pressure on all of us. It does not matter the field, it does not matter the class you're from, it does not matter your village, it does not matter what part of the world you're from. This has been a global issue. But now let me put it in a context that makes way more sense. Imagine an artist who completely gets his or her money from public events, because whether we like it or not, most artists make the presence of a crowd, a physical crowd. And if I use artist, I'm not just keeping it to a musician or to a fine artist or to a painter. I'm anyone creative, anyone in the field of creativity. Now you imagine in the African setting, creatives are seen as people who are wasting time. So most times their family is not backing them anymore. Most times these are people who are struggling on their own, pushing through things on their own. It is them and their family. Now, source of income has been shut down. Your source of income has police somewhere ready with a rungu to beat you so that you're not ready to do your source of income. And you can imagine being an artist trying to fend for himself and use their same art to find creativity. Definitely, that's a conflict.
So the internet was not completely on our side today, but we hope we solved all the issues now in the background. And we will go back to Sharlotte to have her continue with her talk. And after that, we will have also a moment to hear again from Peter, which was not, we couldn't hear him all the way before. So handing over to you again, Sharlotte.
Yes, and I hope this time the network does not decide. Yeah, so I was talking about a creative in the unsetting and affected creatives owing to the fact that creative 80 or 70% from the crowd that they meet every day. This is within workshops, events, name it, but anything that is a gathering is a space for an artist. So you must be able to provide for yourself a source of income or a way of living through the day, and then go with the normal pressures of mental health that comes with knowing we are in. This has been, I think, for all of us who've been watching the TV or not, or listening to the radio or reading, we have seen how this has affected the world mentally. Now, as creatives, work I have been doing both in Kenya and Uganda using the internet, so for the internet, is anxiety therapy sessions, art therapy sessions online for artists. They've been encouraging me. So under Art Porium, we've been able to have a few art organized online for artists because, like I was saying, in an African setting, art is considered a profession. Artists are not considered a way. So most times, most of the artists you'd find within this time of COVID-19 are either alone, his wife, husband, because unless you're a successful artist, your family thinks you're wasting your time. And I'm talking from experience. My mother still doesn't understand what poetry is. But at the end of the day, all that pressure comes into anxiety because you are afraid of what is the future going to hold. When are they ever going to open arcades or malls for me to make my money? Allow us have workshops. So that is where the art comes in because we all need a therapist. We all need someone to talk to. And we all need an external way of dealing with the mental pressure that is coming. But another thing we've been working on is how do we build alternatives? The internet is present. The internet is available. How do we use the internet? How do we use what is present on the internet through right now? So we've been doing activities on branding, going through artists that we're saying they don't know how to brand themselves. But for most of us who are national artists, we don't see branding as such a big thing. But branding is another way of allowing yourself make the income from your artist. How do you market yourself? Online space to understand your fans, analyze your fans, to reach out to your fans in the right way, but still maintain that space. Remember, but we won't just lie. As long as an artist is able to fund and feed themselves, their art, because our brains cannot function when we are hungry. Our brains cannot with ulcers and struggling with pneumonia, and you need medication. Remember, most artists are not on contract, especially starting off artists. They're not under management. They are managing themselves. They are pushing themselves. So how do we help these artists from the ground level up? How do we help an artist feel comfortable within this time 19 or a creative feel comfortable within this time of COVID-19 without them thinking, I would rather drop my art and do something else? Keeps culture alive. Me, myself, came from a point of experience. How do I help? Because I was struggling, but then thank God to the presence of all these other organizations like Rogue, Defy Hate Now, people who are seeing the work as not just a psychologist's work, but an artist's work. So how do I combine psychology and poetry or being creative to be able to help my peers, my creative peers, make an impact, but still not lose our minds? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Charlotte, for the statement. And I hope we could hear most of it this time. So I want to make sure we also have enough questions later for the audience. So I would suggest we go on to Peter to make a short statement. And maybe, Peter, if you could rotate your view to horizontal. Yeah, perfect. So then if you could, give a short statement based on what you talked about earlier, that would be awesome. Peter, we're not hearing you yet. I don't know if you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now it's good.
Yes, please. Can you repeat what you said? The line was breaking. I couldn't hear you. Please quickly can you repeat?
So now
Hello?
we would have time for you to give a short statement based on what you talked about earlier, because now hopefully the sound should be better. So
Okay.
handing over to you.
Yeah. I mean, so what I was saying and what is of essence here is that in times of COVID-19, the world is facing, Nigeria has had its own share of how it has been relating to solving its own problems. And I itemized them. What we noticed is that there was a growing, because of the first case that was introduced, that was announced on 27th of February 2020. Immediately the government took some measures, including the lockdowns and curfews, and this led to citizen resentments, public outcries, and this even trended on social media. We had hashtags coming up like End COVID-19 Scam. There were also issues of testing isolation centers. You would get tested and weeks on end, some people have been tested for months, they never got their results. We had issues of people taken to isolation camps and them escaping because the conditions were just not conducive. We've had people who went into isolation centers, treatment centers, and they came out to say that they were just given on medication for malaria, nothing really showing that. So there have been a lot of ups and downs in terms of knowledge, information about what's going on. But what I was emphasizing earlier was that there has not been enough information on the expenditure of all the monies that has been coming in. Nigeria has requested for loans up to millions of dollars, and they have gotten it. World Bank, IMF, private sector has come together. The richest man in Africa, Aliko Dangote, brought about a cohort of other businessmen that have donated millions and multiple billions into the accounts. And all these monies are going into the government coffers. So while we know money has been going into the government coffers, we don't have accurate understanding of how this money has been expended. And when you come from the history that Nigeria has, Africa and the rest other countries which don't have a good system of transparency and accountability, you have to question how are these funds being disbursed? Who are they being disbursed to? And what we have seen is that we have a public procurement law, quite all right, in this country, which gives guidelines on how procurement public funds should be expended. But we've never had a situation where there's an emergency of this gravity, of this magnitude, and yet you still have to do those public procurements, whereby you still have to buy the face masks, buy the sanitizers, buy so many things that everybody around the world is looking for at the same time. So there's a competition across the world. People are trying to buy the same one product by the few manufacturers. As a result of that, the competition makes that this demand hikes the prices. So you see people coming forth to say they want to procure things for the government, and government gives out contracts to private companies to go and conduct these procurements on behalf of the government. And yet, these things that are being procured, nobody knows exactly for certainty that indeed these things are being bought at fair value for money, or even at all if these things are even being delivered to where they're supposed to be. And why we are having these difficulties, because companies, some of them as registered as far back as 1989, don't even have a presence online. So a company that is dealing with millions of dollars in terms of procurement of goods and services and works for the country don't have a presence. So you cannot say you want to check them out and say, what is this company all about? They don't have a presence online. They don't have a history. They don't have a website. They don't have any social media presence. But even worst of all, they don't even have the documentation complete that gives them the legal right to bid for contracts or to get contracts from government to expend public funds. And we have seen many companies like that already that are not in good standing to be able to procure or to enter into government contracts to procure goods and services and works on behalf of Nigerians, which we are seeing also the case now with COVID-19 funds. And when I'm saying COVID-19 funds, we're talking about billions of dollars that have come into this country to ensure that this fight against the virus is really curtailed and controlled. But unfortunately, as I'm speaking to you, there are still more debts. Nigeria has opened up virtually, just remaining the airspace and interstate transport. But people are already going to work. Some places have reopened places of worship. So what we're saying is that the contamination is still there. The risk is still there. So there will still be procurement. People will still be using money, but so people can actually get rich themselves and reach themselves from money that they are stealing or embezzling instead of it being used for what it's supposed to be for. And unless we have strong mechanisms and the anti-graft agencies are really working at hand to ensure that any form of graft is controlled, curtailed, but if there is at all, those that are involved in it are prosecuted. And maybe lastly, one of the things I really want to mention is that because around the world, countries are taking loans from foreign countries, from multilateral lenders, from IMF. But Nigeria is also critical because right now we have a high public debt ratio. We have a very, very high foreign debt ratio. And what that means is that as we're taking on money, some of them with a lot of them with interest, it means we will have to pay back one day. But with corruption, making sure that these monies are not utilized for what they are, it puts us back in a state where we still remain poor because monies that are meant to solve problems have been taken out and we're taking more loans, more debts, and it's going to be harder on the common man. So what we have been doing with civil society in Nigeria is we've been sending a lot of freedom of information requests, access to information to governments, saying, give us breakdowns and details of how this money is coming in and how you're spending it so that we can hold you accountable. And that's exactly what I said the first time. I hope this time around it's a bit clearer.
Great. Yes, thank you very much, Peter. That was very good. And I thought what I also took from your first presentation to this one, which was very similar and less connection to this one, but this great point of when there is a tradition and or trends and patterns of corruption in a country, when something as big hits as a COVID-19, I think the great investigative journalist looks back to those old patterns, right? And then there's the new story that needs to be written and reported. And it seems like you're doing great work into that. And I think that's one of the interesting parts that I also take as the global aspect that needs to happen in all communities, all societies around the world, with these big shifts and money in particular changing quickly and no one really knows what we're doing and what we're in for. I think the investigative journalism is so important here. We've just coordinated behind the scenes that because we had the text issues, we're gonna jump straight to the audience questions and not have so much of a conversation in between us. We can, of course, have it based off the audience questions. But to kick us off with that, I had one question for all three of you. And that's actually how your day, if you just briefly can describe how your day yesterday was, like as the journalist, as the artist, activist, not in detail, and we don't want to need to hear all the little things, but just like what's the difference doing your work, doing your activism yesterday as opposed to 3-4 months ago? Can you just give us that, and then we'll jump into the audience questions. And thanks for some wonderful presentations. And I should, of course, give a running order. How about we start with Jedi, because you started before as well, and then we go to Peter and then Charlotte. Thanks. You're muted, Sharlotte. Oh, Jedi, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Magnus. What has changed for me is I'm confined to my room, definitely, and I haven't actually been outside to see people, or even I wasn't able to do a lot of on the field interviews. So many of our field reports we've gotten from journalists who are already on the field in Kenya, Central African Republic, Mozambique, etc. And at some point, our executive producer was also able to go out. So I wake up every morning and make some coffee and come and sit here at this desk. And then maybe at around 1 o'clock, I'd go out and have a bit of sun because my room is cold. And then I'll work until 4. And then when I'm done, I'll have supper and then go to bed. I think I go to bed earlier these days because I find that I need more energy because I spend a lot of my time online and also very, very cold.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I find myself doing more work, actually, because now you have to coordinate a lot more information. the information outflow now is so much, so high, so intense that if you don't follow up on a periodic time basis, what you have left for a long time, you will find yourself having to research more backwards. So you have to keep up the information so that you're not left behind, and you can also predict possible future occurrences. And so for me, it's also about working more, having to do a lot more uh, communication in terms of I can't really go on the field to get information. So I have to rely more on people looking for the sources, and you have to now keep looking. But it's been also a very enriching experience because it has taught me that in every situation as human beings, we will adapt. We must adapt. And so I'm adapting. I'm finding opportunities to do more online and to connect more. And I mean, if not for this kind of situation, probably we might not have this interface that we're having. And Disruptive Labs, Disruptive Fridays can only get better from things like this. So for me, it's been a lot of activity, but rewarding activity.
Great, thank you. And Charlotte, how's your day yesterday been? Or yes, Charlotte.
Can everyone
hear
hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, for me, Fast Things Fast taught me I can actually walk 10 kilometers to get information and do other things. It created a foundation for me to understand the creative a bit in depth, more no longer just also I'm a mental health advocate. I'm also a mental health advocate for creatives. Respect creative all other level. Of course, things for me are I'm busy. I'm very busy. I'm up and down. I'm trying to learn a few things, especially teach myself how you can use the internet for so much more than just meetings. I'm teaching myself how VR can be used in helping creatives with mental health. And it's given me, I think the only difference between 3 months ago and now is 3 months ago I would move from Nairobi to Kenya with so much ease and do so much work in Kenya and Uganda at the same time. But because I can't move, I have been in my house chilling most of the time, working on the internet, trying to also teach myself how to relax my mind. Because, like I already said, apart from being an artist, I am a psychologist too. So I deal with people on a daily basis. So it has also been a time, it has taught me so much about intent and self awareness, being one with yourself and being comfortable knowing that we don't know how tomorrow would go, especially for me who is in because Uganda's lockdown just keeps, we are still in lockdown, we're still in curfew. That's why I'm in my room. I couldn't have done from like the at 7 p.m. So it is, well, it is part of, it's teaching me a lot. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. It was very interesting to hear this perspective from all three of you. Then we'll be moving on to the audience questions, but we would like to ask briefly to Charlotte if you could maybe turn off the camera so that we have you join only via audio. So that might be a chance to have a slightly better connection also for the questions. We have quite a lot of audience questions, so I would like to suggest that I read three of them first and we go through these and then we see how we do with the time. So I will read out the three of them and then you can each answer. So the first question is for everyone. Are there any alternative ways of protesting that have emerged during the pandemic, given that the virus has exposed such fragile systems and inability to grant basic human rights needs? And then a question specifically for Charlotte. How are people finding different forms of emotional connection and support for mental health? And then a question specifically for Peter. Given the chaos of the crisis, we can also see this moment as a window of opportunity for policy change. Have you seen any movement on the policy front, either within countries or with international organizations? So I would suggest maybe if it's okay for you, Jedi, that you could take the first question about the protesting, because the other one is for Charlotte and then one for Peter.
Okay, I mean, I think there have been efforts. People tried to go out, like, let me just go back to the first question. I think I'm not sure if it's about protest.
I can post it again in the chat for you. So it's
Okay,
about, yeah.
Okay, so there have been several groups that have been set up. For example, here in Cape Town, where I live, there's OBS community networks that respond directly to people who are in need. They have been buying tents for the homeless, providing soup kitchens, and they've raised a lot of money making masks and even filing legal petitions for people that are being evicted and giving them options. So that has been one way. There are other groups that are canvassing to end lockdown. There have been specific interest groups in terms of people campaigning to have the ban on cigarettes lifted, for example, and an interest group campaigning for alcohol sales to open, which it did. Interest groups that are also campaigning for alcohol to be closed. So there are several community networks, people that are actually doing things outside of government that are actually responding and intervening. But some of them are saying that they are feeling quite a heavy burden of carrying the work that government should be doing, actually. And so there was another person from Total Lockdown, which is an organization that deals with gender-based violence, who was saying that, in the past sort of 2 weeks or so, she has personally received 25 calls from who've been raped in the past couple of days. And so I think that even community workers and people who are filling in the gaps where government should be are also starting to get tired, and the burden is becoming too much. So I think that it's both ways. People are doing things, but also government is being called upon to do a lot more at this point to actually help people, because everybody's kind of caving in from the burden of having to deal with the work that government did not do before, the COVID-19 outbreak.
So thank you, Jedi. And then I think, Peter, maybe you want to address the question about policy change.
Oh yeah. So yes, I mean, rightly observed. There's a chaos. The chaos of the crisis has brought about panic, fear, confusion, but also it's bringing about an opportunity. And that opportunity that we see, when I say we, I mean myself and other journalists, civil society actors, Nigerians, concerned Nigerians. And basically it's that there's an opportunity to reverse or to improve policies when it comes to emergency procedures, because never have we had a situation in terms of ensuring that there's a policy change, is that we are trying to bring out all the flaws we are noticing about around procurement in terms of emergency situations. And as we are releasing them to the public, but also there will be a coordinated approach to say, look, this has been our observations. Give and take. We don't know what tomorrow holds. There might be another emergency that will require public procurement in the emergency period. But this should be the barest minimum standards that we should accept from any organization, ministry, government, parastatal, public or private sector in terms of utilization of public funds. So yes, that is an opportunity, and there is already a movement of that. We have quite a number of civil society actors who are keen on government expenditure, transparency, and accountability. So yeah, that answers that particular question. I don't know if I can go ahead. There was another question on tools of corruption, misinformation, but let me know. Can I go ahead, or I should just wait?
No, you can go ahead if you want to answer one more. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, so there was a question on touching on the issue of how COVID-19 is used, another tool of corruption, misinformation, and perhaps to aggravate conflicts. Are there any fact-checking initiatives, groups in Nigeria combating these infodemic elements of COVID-19? Yes. I mean, we have numerous, well, let me not say numerous because we have a population of 200 million. So we can't say we have numerous, but we have checks on information. That's one. And two, not only terminating the real facts and calling out those who are spreading those fake news. And so that helps because by the time you discredit organizations, blogs rather, when you discredit social media handles, influencers, blogs who are spreading misinformation, then you're also crediting those who are spreading the right information. It helps information, and it gives us a sense of greater accountability on those who are delivering the accountable to standards so that they don't fall to the category of those that we are also denouncing who are spreading the fake news. Another means, again, there was another question on how exactly are we get out there in terms of, well, having got a number of social media is actually the main thing online. So what people are doing, complaints of human rights violations, complaints of any form that has to do with COVID-19, the situation we are in now, people go on social amplify that, aggregate it, and call out those agencies or individuals who are perpetrating whatever, those people accountable. So what we are saying is that there's an opportunity to do more because of this situation we find ourselves and change what has been in the past to a better situation for us in the future.
I think we have 2 more questions to go through before we run out of time. So maybe first one for Jedi. Also a comment from the audience that it's amazing the podcast work you've been doing. And someone was asking if you have a way to package and share the methodology of how you worked so that others can learn how to produce such content locally.
Thank you, Lieke. Yeah, thank you, Lieke. We haven't developed a methodology yet. I think in one of the interviews, someone asked, and we were saying we were experimenting also with COVID in Africa. We wanted to just explore different ways of storytelling and see how that works. But we also do training actually on how to produce podcasts and storytelling. And I suppose we would formulate something that could be used locally by other people coming from online. We'll be taking a break, as I mentioned earlier. So I think within a month or the next month, we'll start to think about how to re-strategize and use what we learned with other people and share it with other people in an easy way. So that's something that we're thinking about, but we haven't actually created any package that people can access online yet.
All right. Well, it would be great if it would be coming at some point in the future. Of course, if you find the time for that, despite everything. I think we're running slightly over time already, so maybe it's a good moment to ask each of you for a short closing sentence before we wrap up the session of today. Maybe who wants to start with the closing sentence? We can go again, Jedi, Peter, Charlotte, if it's okay for you.
Yeah, I think my final one is one thing that I think I forgot to mention in this discussion is that what COVID-19 showed very explicitly is that we cannot always use the same sort of templates that are applied in rich northern countries and transfer them and apply them in the exact same way on different African countries. So I think that African leaders, politicians, policymakers, even civil society workers really need to be a bit more sensitive about how they implement certain things, and they have to be really suitable to the specific environments and situations of every country, every city, every village, for example, that not one solution applies to everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jedi. That's a great point. And then Peter, do you have a final statement you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Surely I will. Just to also answer a question I was asked in terms of government procurement contracts, are there ways to fund community organizations and initiatives? Well, what we see is that there are a lot of organizations who are doing their own thing, reaching out to communities, to less privileged, to IDPs, as internally displaced persons, refugees who are in the country. they are doing the stuff. But when it comes to having that mass scale of intervention, you really need the government, because the government is the one that will mobilize really the people in terms of locations, local governments, chairman, councillors. So the government is very much involved. But when you supervise, there is also a tendency that if you don't hover around them, it could be, there's likelihood for corruption if you don't have oversight functions in terms of how to spend. But in the final word, I would just say that this is an opportunity. Everyone should look at COVID-19 as an opportunity to be more active in their governance, to be more active in life. And life is about what we consider as life for us, which is our fundamental rights, which are the fundamental objectives of government to provide for its citizens. And where you feel there's a shortfall in that, it's your right to also say, no, we need to get what is due us. The Commonwealth of every nation belongs to who the citizen is in that country. And there should be no one who has undue advantage in suffering or making other people suffer for what they have refused to do in terms of healthcare, education. Every kind of sector in every country needs to be revamped so that we in Africa don't fall short of being the underdogs in how we combat our own problems.
We can hear Charlotte for the final. You can hear me? Then let's go to Charlotte for the final statement, but I would suggest, Charlotte, if you could keep it short, because sometimes your sound is cutting up a bit.
Yeah, so for my final, if I am being hard, I'm basically going to just ask the world to pay more attention to mental health. I know there's so many activities, there's so many things we can tell the world to do to protect their mental health, but we need to be physically on and not take small things like food and money for granted, because these things help in improving someone's health, mental health. Being able to access basic needs is a big foundation for mental health. So whatever position you carry, whatever position you take, respecting and providing for the basic needs of anyone is the first step to helping with their mental health. Yes.
I'm really happy, because that's a beautiful statement, Charlotte. Thanks a lot. Then slowly wrapping up to go towards the end. Actually, I would also, of course, like to thank a lot Magnus for sharing the moderation with me today. And maybe there's also something you would like to say before we close the session.
Quickly, just want to thank everyone for joining, both audiences and Peter, Jedi, and Charlotte in particular, and then the Disruption Network Lab, like you guys, and including the tech team behind the scenes that you don't see. I think that's really a big effort that goes into. I was thinking of previous pandemics historically. We could not have these conversations. We would sit outside Florence and we'd be a group of friends and we would talk with each other. Now, because of many developments, right, we can face this difficult challenge. And then in particular, then you have tech people behind the scenes that makes us have this conversation, but despite the glitches. So a big thank you to Disruption Network Lab, and in particular the tech team.
Worked out today despite some of the glitches in between. So then before I hand over to Tatiana to say something about what we'll be doing this summer, just to mention to all of you that Disruptive Fridays will be taking a little break, but don't worry, we will be back. So just like the COVID in Africa podcast, we take a little time off, but we are coming back on the 21st of August again. So we hope to see you all then. And then I'll hand over to Tatiana Bazzichelli to talk a bit about what else will be happening this summer with the Disruption Network Lab.
Yes, thank you very much, Lieke. Thank you, Magnus. And thank you, everybody, for this very important session of the Disruptive Fridays. We really need to stress this kind of issues, because we need to understand more what is happening at the global scale. So this was really important to have you all. Thank you very much. And also I wanted to say that with Magnus, we are going to collaborate also more in the future, because we are actually planning together a conference that will happen next summer in June. And we will also focus on the discourse of the politics of China and the protest. So This is something that I already announced now, to say also that with Magnus we go on to research together and also to investigate on future topics. So to speak about the summer program, we are also very happy to say that finally we are planning to be in real life all together. We are now in the program organizing 2 film screenings. So one will be on July 30 at Akud in Berlin. This is also connected to the previous conference that we were organizing, Evicted by Greed. Today has been mentioned a lot, also the discourse of eviction. That is something that we have been working on at the Disruption Lab. And on July 30, we are showing the film Push from Frederick Gerten that we were already announcing during our conference in May. And this is a film about global finance, housing, eviction, and also the resistance that we can have. The main character is Leilani Farah, that has been working as the UN Global Rapporteur on the right to housing. So she will also push and stress the importance of considering housing as a civil and human right. And instead, August 12, we will have a second film screening of the film Never Whistle Alone. This is a film about anti-corruption and whistleblowing in Italy. Another very important topic that is often neglected in Italy, related to the discourse of how people can report on the discourse of corruption at work, and also exposing illegal activity in the business field. The film will be the Berlin premiere. The director is Marco Ferrari. And after the film, we will have a panel related to the discourse of whistleblowing protection, together with Priscilla Robledo from the Good Lobby, Veronica Nad from Blueprint from Speech, and Anna Ramskloger-Witz, that is the director of the Human Rights Film Festival Berlin. I invite the people to register to this film screening because, of course, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, the seats are limited and they will be outdoor. So we are also, careful of regulations, but we will need to have registration from everybody. So now I pass again to Lieke to conclude the day, and I thank you again, everybody, and we will meet in the summer, hopefully in real life, if something else doesn't disrupt us, but hopefully not. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Tatiana. We're looking forward to having these events in real life again in the summer, but also looking forward to hosting more Disruptive Fridays from the 21st of August onwards. And yeah, big thanks again to our speakers of today. It was really amazing to hear from you. And I really hope when all the corona outbreak is over that we also manage to meet in person someday, either in Africa, in Europe, or somewhere else. It would be amazing. And yeah, it was great to learn more about your work. And also thanks again to Magnus for sharing the moderation today with me and helping to get this session together. So yeah, thanks everybody and enjoy your weekend, and see you again in August for the next Disruptive Fridays.